Thank you, Dr. Samsuri. Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon, everyone. Faisal here from the Research and Planning Department. So today's policy dialogue focuses on pressing issues that face our Malay Muslim youths and young professionals in this COVID world. Just to share some context here, this year alone, we have 48,500 graduates entering the workforce from various tertiary institutions in Singapore. So interestingly, MOM's job situation report just recently released in October indicated that less than a third of the opportunities were filled up under the SG United Jobs and Skills package. So what does it mean? It means that there are still unfilled vacancies. And MOM has also stated that there is perhaps a mismatch in expectations and skills. So my question is whether Malay Muslim youths are well prepared to take up these opportunities to be more resilient. So before I do that, I would like to invite the guest of honor, Dr. Muhammad Maliki Osman, Minister in the Prime Minister's Office, and Second Minister, Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of Education. Welcome, Minister.
Thank you very much, Faisal.
Minister, based on the video clip and presentations that you have heard earlier, in your opinion, what is the Malay Muslims youth's preparedness to take up all these opportunities?
Well, thank you very much for the question, and thank you so much to the speakers for a very enlightening set of presentations. I think the video showed the excellent and extreme enthusiasm amongst young people and the understanding of the context of which they're growing up in and where they are heading, acknowledging challenges that they face, at the same time ready to take on those challenges. And I think I'm very heartened to hear such enthusiasm. The reality is we know it is not an easy world, nor the future that they're heading into, very different from the future that I entered when I was their age. But certainly we will be here to present to them the necessary infrastructure that will be supportive of them getting into the space that they're going into. So, for example, I'm very I was heartened to hear Dr. Hana spoke about the various opportunities that we can create in the education sphere, and being in the Ministry of Education, I'm very sure that educators don't disagree with the areas that she has highlighted. And in fact, we are reviewing and always looking at how best we can create an education system that does prepare our students for the future. The challenge really is that the future is changing so fast now. So by the time our kids get into primary one at 7 years old, and we think that preparing them for 10 years of education will get them to somewhere, by the time they're in 4th year already, you see a lot of changes in the environment. And then by the time they get to 10th year, it's another set of challenges that come in. So that's really how we ought to continue to ready ourselves, not just the hard skills that the speaker spoke about, but really the ability to adapt and the ability to acquire those soft skills very early in life too. But we also do not want to overwhelm our kids because we really do want them to explore their own strengths, explore their own capabilities. And that's why, just very quickly, we all know that in MOE, we've put in new systems in place to take away some of the pressures of PSLE scoring. Even in secondary schools, we are going into subject-based banding, looking at strengths that each student has. And I think more fundamentally, I also would like to send this message to our students, our youth out there. The reality is that we do not have to think that our trajectory is one that is linear. And the more we think that it's linear, meaning that you have to go to secondary school, O-level, A-level, or poly, university, and you start working only when you get to after you get to university. I think the more we think of a linear trajectory, the more difficult it is, I think, for them to be able to get into the new space and the new future, because in the new future is really where you find relevance, as Isha has mentioned earlier. And that's where part of the things that we are trying to promote really is this whole idea of work-based, what we call it, work-study programs, where you get into the work and realize the kind of skill set that you also need to enhance your relevance to the company they are in, and you can continue to do so. And that's really the fundamental principle behind lifelong learning, where you do not stop learning. Just very quickly, Faisal, if I may, in the background, you see Minister of Foreign Affairs, and I've always been asked what is, by many of our foreign visitors, what's unique about Singapore? What is the key success factor of Singapore? I tell them 3 things very simply. We are always works in progress. We've never stopped reinventing ourselves, and we always must find our relevance in the world because we are a small country. And I think that's a simple message to our young people also. Believe that your always works in progress. You're never at end point. And we must always reinvent ourselves, and reinventing ourselves meaning that you need to acquire skills at a different point in time. At the same time, being relevant to the people, to the companies, to the networks that you're connected with. Thanks.
Thank you, Minister. I think I do believe and I agree with what you are saying, and I feel that we have some ground sentiments that support your observation. Just to share with the panelists as well, a survey of 200 youths aged between 15 to 35 was conducted last month by MENDAKI towards lifelong learning, and this poll suggests that around 91% or 9 in 10 agree that the skills upgrading will actually help them find a better job. So we see that it's this high level of willingness here, especially for those below 35. And it seems also that this segment is prepared to take up these opportunities. But perhaps one question is, how does this sense of willingness translate into action, right? Perhaps that question could be answered later by our panelists, especially from Farida and Irshad. So before we do that, a gentle reminder to our YouTube viewers to log in their accounts and to share the questions. And while we wait for that, I would like to also now focus to our one of participants actually, Miss Nisa, who is a junior college student. Nisa, are you here with us?
Yes, I am.
Hi, Nisa.
All right.
Hi.
Very good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Nisa, and I come from Anglo-Chinese Junior College. And I have one question, and primarily it is for Dr. Hannah. So I would like to ask, what are your views in the differences of perception of setbacks between children and parents due to the intergenerational gap? And to simplify my question, I'd like to give a scenario where I think many youths like me would have probably faced. So I've heard from many of my friends that when they have a problem and they try to seek help from adults such as their parents, many a times their parents would brush it off and say, oh, I faced situations far worse than you, or you shouldn't be stressed about a small thing like this. And the worst part is that they will say this isn't that big of a deal. So isn't this in a sense undermining the problems of youth now? And how does this affect the resilience of youth, and what should be done to solve this issue? Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Nisa. Oh, sorry.
Such an eloquent question. Okay, go ahead, Hannah.
Yes, thank you for the very important question as well about the intergenerational gap, about how our parents, a lot of parents actually say that, in my time, you had to work hard. For you guys, all you have to do is just go to school and study. It's so easy. You still want to complain so much, and all that. But yeah, I mean, what if I may answer this in two ways, okay? First is in general, I would say every generation of youth, children and youth, they are shaped by the social, political, economic events of the day, right? Different historic events. So today's youth are no different. So each of us, we grow up in different times, facing different versions of problems, right? Even schools are managed differently now. Like for me, for my son, who has been in a few trouble in his time, what he has to do is sit down and write reflection letter, right? For my time, if I was a boy and I did the same thing that he did, definitely I'll be on stage kena cane already. It's a different story, different time. But with that, I would say, what my view is, if I were to face that situation, is first I need to hold space. Like I said, build relationships. Communication is key. Relationship is key. Hold the space. Have some take perspectives of ourselves and of our parents, right? For example, our parents may not grow up, they didn't grow up in digital times and may not fully appreciate the impact of technology or social media has on a person. Even as multiple studies have found like a strong link between heavy social media use and increased risk for depression, anxiety, loneliness, self-harm, even suicidal thoughts, right? But for parents, some of them say, just turn it off, just stop doing, they don't fully appreciate the brevity of it. And also now there seems to be a general perception, right, that today's youth are softer, always complaining. There's the strawberry generation. Then after that, there's the durian generation or something like that. But then studies have actually shown that today's Gen Zs tend to be less entitled, more realistic than earlier generations, right? They're ready to work hard, but they want to work fair, right? They are inclusive, they're concerned about social justice, and they're increasingly more diverse, less partisan, which means they may eventually insist on more cooperative, more egalitarian system, right? And social media will most likely play a role in that revolution if it doesn't sink our youths into anxiety and depression first. So we need to, so going back to communication and strong relationships, right? What would I do if I were to face the differences? First is I always, I use a lot of this. This is in mediation skills. And I learned this from way back when I was in the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, where we learned a few mediation negotiation skills from Harvard. And I find myself even now using this in my everyday communication, right? And one that I use a lot is called the golden questions. And the golden questions that mediators always ask is always these three. What is your greatest concern? So what's my greatest concern? What do I most want to see happen? And what do I want the other person to understand? Okay, so I ask these three questions a lot. So every time when I'm faced with a problem, or if you face a problem with your parents, then I think we need to take the initiative to ask ourselves these three questions. So for example, what is my greatest concern? My greatest concern is that my problems and my feelings are being downplayed, is dismissed, is invalidated, right? So what do I most want to see happen? What I most want to see happen is fairness, for you to understand, for me to be heard fairly, right? And so what do I most want the other person to understand? Perhaps is to see that my feelings are valid, even though my problems you may not fully appreciate or understand my problems, but this is how I feel. And if you have that basis or foundation of that relationship, they would, I mean, I'm sure your parents would be concerned about how you feel, right? So even if the problems I face may seem less. So I think we can access our critical thinking skills, we take a step back and we ask ourselves the golden questions. Does that help, Nisa?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Hannah, for that response. I think this is something similar to what we have found in our poll again, below the age of 35. So we found out that youth choose their friends as their first source, family as the second, and such information such as careers and also relationships. So parents' advice and response, I think it's very important to them. And family members should therefore be also well informed, right? Updated and supportive in the way they relate and engage their children. So we have a few questions online, and I want to quickly link this to one from Mr. Fazli Mansour with regards to the growth of online learning platforms. Do we see employers, both public and private sector, putting less emphasis on paper qualifications in place of online achievements? Okay, so it's paper qualifications versus online achievements. Perhaps I could ask our two panelists, Farida and Irshad, to chime in.
Irshad, you want to go first?
Sure. I think what's interesting is that at least in the sector that I come from, the technology sector, you had Google coming out to announce that they're going to replace the sort of qualifications, not replace. They're also going to roll out their own qualifications from Google that sort of replaces what they're looking for from a person that they're hiring. And these are all digital skill sets. And in fact, digital skill sets that you acquire are constantly and rapidly changing. So as much as you have a degree from a university of repute, as much as you have a diploma that you graduate with, what you learn during that 4 years or 3 years gives you the grounding and the foundation. But beyond that, you constantly have to upgrade yourself to keep relevant with the changing nature of technology. And I think not just in the technology sector, but also in any sector that requires skills and competency, this is something that you have to constantly upgrade and sort of upskill, and hence the notion of lifelong learning comes to play. So putting less emphasis on paper qualification, I think paper qualification is still important to, sort of put a foot into the door. But beyond that, how do you excel in that relevant field that you have taken up? You need to, also upskill and sort of get other competencies and frameworks.
So maybe I'll share on the public sector. Actually, it's such a great panel, right? Because we've got a mix of academia, public and private sector. So I think for the public sector, for a while now, we've really been looking at diversifying the kind of scholars and the kind of leaders that we're bringing into the public service, just because we have to respond to the kind of complex, world order that we're in. And so I think first and foremost, the idea of, paper qualifications and also sort of maybe the biasness to maybe certain institutions versus others, I think that there's a movement away from that. And I think at the end of the day is the candidates that we would look for have to bring that well-roundedness and that holistic, skill set. I think that's one very important thing for the public sector. The second is actually, I hold the view that online education has made it, in fact, more accessible for us to gain certain types of paper qualifications that we would not have been able to do so. So I'll give you an example, right? So Get Smarter, for example, today offers executive programs and degree programs from places like Oxford and Cambridge and MIT and all these other areas. So in fact, actually, even for your basic, sort of qualifications and when you're upskilling, when you're talking about MBA and masters and otherwise, I think those are in fact avenues that we could tap on, which wouldn't have been possible, the last couple of years before sort of the advent of online platforms. And then I think the third and last point is actually, at the end of the day, it's also this idea of hard skill, soft skill, right? Would I, as someone who is in a position to hire, when I'm evaluating two candidates, one has a certificate that says I have completed a course on critical thinking and judgment versus someone who actually displays critical thinking and judgment during the interview process, then to me, I'm going to hire the candidate that is actually able to show application as opposed to someone that, sort of just has a cert. So I think that's, another important point to take note of.
Thank you, Farida, for that very good response and a very in-depth reply to compare the difference between qualifications online and paper qualifications. This is a real dilemma that our workers face outside. One quick question by Kazira Kamaluddin. What would members advise on the community, especially mid-career switchers who are resistant to the idea of lifelong learning and upskilling? So there is a segment who think that they do not need, or they think that it is not relevant to them. Perhaps we can ask Ishaq or Dr. Maliki or any other panelists.
Maybe just a quick response to that. I think it is understandable for mid-careerists to have a certain level of anxiety when we ask them to upgrade, because certainly, looking at me and my age, those who are under 45, 50, we came from a generation where upgrading wasn't the operative word, because we were trained in a certain manner and we think that the job is an iron rice bowl that will stay forever. And so we were not readying ourselves for such a world, and yet we are stuck in this environment where we've been asked to keep upgrading. So it's understandable that they're anxious. I think what's necessary really is to walk the journey with them and to take steps where they can see success, where they can see value in upgrading themselves in a certain manner. That's where I think the collective effort of all is important. Not just the person himself, but the employers, looking at how employers can harness that environment. That's really where our skills, for example, the skills SG United mid-career pathway is, where we work together with employers to create and design training programs that makes it more achievable from the perspective of mid-careerist person. At the same time, we also need to look at the community, and community needs to be able to harness their own strengths in supporting mid-careerists to move into new spaces. The SG Teguh Bersatu framework is where we have different stakeholders coming together to create that conducive environment for our mid-careerists to get into that space. So for all the mid-careerists out there, you are not alone. I think if we see that strength in numbers, all of us are in the same space where we want to move into spaces where opportunities are available. I'm very sure they would be able to move into that space. Basically, it's just to normalize the behavior. And when we talk about lifelong learning, why not we normalize this as a journey that is not just for our young people out there, but also for their parents, and that they see that it is part and parcel of, and that's why I talked about the DNA earlier. If we can make this as part of our DNA, I think we'll go far in ensuring that our community tap on those opportunities that's available.
Yeah. Yeah, Faisal, if I can just chime in as well into what Dr. Maliki mentioned, is since I'm from the technology sector, let me just share, to the madam who asked the good question, is there's something called the Companyled Training Program. It's a CLT program, they call it. And it's a structured program under the TESA Skills Accelerator, Tech Skills Accelerator, TESA, an initiative that in fact that aims to accelerate professional development for fresh and mid-career professionals through on-the-job training that is aligned to the skills framework for ICT sector. So I think perhaps, madam, if you're interested in the technology side, you can look up IMDA's website. They've got a whole range of programs for you to join and take up as well. And if you would excuse myself, I just have another program that I need to join. Madam Halima is a GOH, so I just need to welcome her. So thank you so much again to Mendaki and IPS for having me here, and to the distinguished panelists who have joined, and to our dear guest of honor, Dr. Maliki Osman. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Irshad. Maybe to just do a rejoiner in terms of the industries. I think not only we want them to move, we want them to move into the growth sectors. So based on our poll recently, again, we see that IT and banking comes in as fourth and fifth favorite. And of course, education and public sectors came in the top two sectors. That is not surprising, or this is compared to the Comprehensive General Household Survey in 2015, where again, education and public sector remains the traditional choices. So we want them to move as well, but in terms of growth sectors. And I think that is something that we have to work towards, and we need the structures and the support. Right. So, Ms. Farida, would you want to share again anything that the initiatives done by Mendaki Club?
No, thanks so much, Faisal. Maybe just to chime in on that earlier question about mid-career, right? And I think, yes, mid-career, that's quite a wide age gap, right? I could be 35 and that's also considered mid-career. Right. And actually, I think in the public sector, there's an openness, and right now we are also, different agencies are also hiring what we term as sort of senior associates or as senior business advisors. And I think it's that belief that there's so much experience and that wealth of expertise needs to actually be nurtured and be actually pushed into areas where they can feel that they are valued. And then another point is, I think family support is really important. It's actually it's critical, right? And I think that if you're in a position where it's your parents, or it's an uncle and auntie, or and even an older sibling or otherwise, it's a really difficult time for them, right? And that anxiety, I think you can express empathy and you can express encouragement to actually nudge them along the way and say, it's okay, it's difficult, and support them however way that you can. So I think a big shout out on what Mendaki Club is doing. Again, I talked a little bit about our career conversation series. The last one that's coming up is super apt. We've always known that the public service and the public sector has been a key career, a growth career and an emerging career industry for a lot of our Malay Muslim youth. So we're doing a session on the 31st of October. Happy to share more details to the various attendees. I think what we're looking at at, or what the message that we want to push out there is that Malay Muslim youths, you can pursue a career in public sector leadership, either as scholars or as leaders themselves. And I think we welcome that diversity to actually join the public service, and we'd be more than happy to welcome you guys.
Thank you, Farida. Maybe one last thoughts by our Minister. Perhaps, Minister, could you share with us your thoughts on the progress of the Malay Muslim community, especially our youth, and whether they are well prepared to take up these opportunities?
Sorry, I didn't realize that my mic was off. Let me just say that again. Thank you so much, Faisal and Dr. Hana, Farida, Shamsuri, and earlier Irshad, for coming together on this very important panel. So Faisal's question, whether our youth are ready, I have no doubt that they are. I am very, very optimistic, not just based on what I've heard today, but from the many young people who I've come across in many dialogue sessions, in many opportunities where I met with them. They're very enthusiastic. They have a lot of creativity. They have a lot of energy. I think, but one key thing that I think they need to work on really is what has been repeated many times by Farida and also Irshad earlier. It's about the networks. And I think in the new world, really, you need to establish those networks. And I think the community can do its part also to provide opportunities for networking. I mean, Mendaki Club is one excellent example. Don't be shy to the young people out there. You have what it takes to do well. I assure you, from the government's perspective, we are doing our part in creating the infrastructure I spoke about earlier to create opportunities and to recognize the strengths of every student out there. The way we've structured and continue to review our education system is where we want to ensure that young people feel that they are valued as individuals. I think the point that Dr. Hana mentioned earlier in an education system where everybody is an individual with value and has to be valued, and we will value them. And we put in lots of support system, even for those children from lower income backgrounds, children who are faced with very challenging circumstances. There's uplift program that is being developed, and we harness the resources within the community to be able to support them. So I think, just to very quickly sum up, to the young people out there, I think it's really the ball is in your court, where you can step forward, network, and take the opportunities that is presented to you. But remember that the endpoint must not just be a university degree in and of itself, but it's really the skill set that's relevant for you in a field that you're very passionate about. And I think if you stand guided by some of these key principles that's been highlighted by the panelists earlier, I'm very sure, inshallah, all of you will do well in the near future and many, many years down the road. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Maliki. Thank you. We'd just like to summarize today's discussion, and we can see that the Malay community is actually willing to take up opportunities, as what Dr. Maliki has mentioned. But we also want to look at how they need to seek credible sources of information and understand the employer's needs and landscape. I think that's very important. And to plug oneself in networks and find mentors and learn from them to navigate this unfamiliar terrain. I think that's all from me. I think we have not enough time, unfortunately. So just again, thank you to all our panelists and for their candid discussion and views.